I am Devin with KB Tours. We are visiting the Frederick Douglass House to Washington, D.C. Mr. Douglass is about to come out and give a small part of his speech. What to a slave is the 4th of July? We are here with many other people waiting with great anticipation. It is a very warm day, but it is not every day you get to see someone of Mr. Douglass' stature. Mr. Douglass may not be home when you come, but his house is a great place to visit. The house is open for tours on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday. You must make a reservation. I think the ceremony is about to start.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site. Happy Independence Day. We are so glad to have you all out with us to celebrate this morning. My name is John Fowler. I'm the Supervisory Park Ranger for the Historic Homes of National Capital Parks East. Taking the platform at Corinthian Hall, Frederick Douglass did not even know his age. Somewhere in his 30s, this titan of history was standing in Rochester, New York, to do what he did best, use his words to craft America's future. In 1852, Douglass was invited to offer a 4th of July address to a gathered audience. He had made quite the name for himself over recent years. Traveling across the United States, he had roused audiences far and wide. The roar of his voice called millions to action rather than complacency. The fire in his eyes left many awestruck, as one witness described him as majestic in his wrath. Now, he had risked his own life to publish the evils of enslavement. He gave names, dates, and locations. He spoke so much truth, many could not handle it, and on the advice of his allies, he fled internationally, where he railed for nearly 2 years against America's dastardly addiction to trafficking in human flesh. For this 4th of July, 1852, America's most famous black man was asked to do what he had done so many times before: stand on the stage of Rochester's Corinthian Hall and speak his mind. He agreed, but on one condition: he would speak on the 5th of July, not the 4th. 1852 was an election year. Longtime allies, the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Sewing Society, extended the invitation. It was the 25th anniversary of New York's abolition. Monday, July 5th at 10 o'clock a.m. was bound to be an amazing event. The mighty Douglass, self-emancipated husband, father, world-renowned activist, arose confident, committed, and collected. As he pondered the meaning of the 4th of July to America, he spoke not only to that audience in Corinthian Hall on July 5th, 1852, he spoke across time and space to generations he would never see. For over 50 years, citizens have made the pilgrimage to Frederick Douglass's estate known as Cedar Hill, where speakers have quoted, recited, or performed the words from the great abolitionist and orator's most famous speech. For some, celebrating freedom means celebrating defiance. Back in 1852, when Douglass spoke at Corinthian Hall, he was defiant when he criticized the divide between the founding ideas of liberty and the institution of slavery. But still, he found hope and encouraged his audience to see the U.S. Constitution as a document that could offer and provide glorious liberty for all of its citizens. As we get ready to receive Mr. Michael Crutcher as Frederick Douglass, I leave you with a question. How do you choose to celebrate freedom? Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Mr. Frederick Douglass.
Top of the morning to you.
Morning,
Mr. Douglass.
He who would address this audience without a quelling sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember to have appeared as a speaker more shriekingly, nor with greater distrust in my ability than I do today. Should I seem at ease, my appearance would much misrepresent me. The little I've had in addressing small country schools has nothing for me on this occasion. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why have I been called upon to speak here today? What I have are those I represent to do with your 4th of July celebration. Are the great principles of freedom and of natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us. And am I therefore here called upon to bring out our humble offering to the national altar and to confess benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us. I'm not included in this pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters to the grand illuminated temple of liberty and to call of him to join you in your joyous anthems were inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean citizens to mock me? If so, there is a parallel to this conduct. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of pirates, brass-fronted impotence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Prayers and hymns. Your sermons and thanksgivings with all the religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than the people of the United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world. Travel to South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of everyday practices of this nation. And you will say with me, for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, if I had the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a stern rebuke, a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, and withering sarcasm. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The conscience of the nation must be aroused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. And the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. Thank you. your life. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll now take any questions at this time.
Yes, our friend here in the front.
Hi, good evening. Good afternoon. Oh, good morning. So excited to be here. I have a question for Mr. Douglass. Recently, our United States government is going to reopen some of the cases from some of the lynchings that have happened to African Americans through no fault of their own. I would like to know if Mr. Douglass, once these individuals are caught and once these crimes are revealed as to the perpetrator, how does he think it should be handled with that individual, especially if they're still living?
Well, I will say, hi everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name is Brittany Hall. I'm the Education and Training Coordinator for the National Park Service Chesapeake Gateways. But I am coming home to the Douglass House to help with the Q&A session, and you'll see me doing some tours during this holiday. So I want to thank you for your question. She asked about recent court cases being reopened on the sort of historical lynchings. I would say Frederick Douglass was a mentor to the very great Ida B. Wells. For those of you who are familiar with Ida B. Wells, go ahead and read. Yes. So when Frederick Douglass lived here at Cedar Hill, he was in a point of his career where he was kind of sunsetting, right? He was an elder gentleman. He was, working a few statesman positions to sort of shore up his legacy, understanding that his life was likely going to come to an end, although he lived another 18 years here. So, so Frederick Douglass was, in fact, mentoring actively the next generation. And in fact, people kind of questioned Douglass's sort of drive at this point of his life. You just heard the sort of 4th of July speech, is what we call it for short. And in that moment, in 1852, he was a younger man. He was fiery, right? He said, like, this moment is cause for fire, right? Fiery rhetoric. Whereas in his later years, he was in a government position. He wore something similar to me wearing my badge right now, right? Gotta, gotta juggle the responsibilities of that. And so he was mentoring that next generation. And one of those young people was Ida B. Wells. And, she was a firebrand in and of herself. So I would say understanding his position, especially with the 1893 World's Fair and his, advocacy along with Wells of supporting in her anti-lynching campaign, that he would be very much interested in seeing how this plays out. Thank you. Yes, right here in the front.
So Mr. Douglass's speech is famous with the view of history. How was it, Mr. Douglass's speech is famous in view of history. How was it received at the time?
At the time, well, it's interesting because Frederick Douglass was invited to speak in front of the Rochester Anti-Slavery Ladies Association in 1852. And he was quite famous already, quite a rock star at this point. And so it was kind of expected of him that he would come and kind of push the envelope. I would say that it wasn't as famous as it is today, right? I did see that he was selling the copies of the speech a week later for 10 cents. But at the same time, did publicize the speech, and it became over time sort of the level of famousness that we have today. But yes, at the time, it wasn't as much attention on it. Other questions?
We have a question.
Yeah.
Can you just summarize some of the outcome actions of the speech, just in general?
Well, it's a 40-page pamphlet. It's a pretty long speech. Douglass does advocate for the sort of federal government to take responsibility for the rights, securing the rights of enslaved people, and also, because of who he's talking to, a group of people who are actually abolitionists themselves, or they aligned with the anti-slavery cause, right? These weren't people that needed to be convinced that slavery was bad, right? So at the same time, he was also pushing folks in the audience to consider their own hypocrisies as they're celebrating national freedom, right? To really redirect that energy to ensuring that all people within the United States have those equal rights, and that included enslaved people and free blacks at that time. So yeah, definitely those action items coming out of the speech.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question. I would like to know what part of Africa does the Douglass family come from? Because I see the cane, and I'm not sure if it's Nigerian or not. So that's why I wanted to know.
We have not, traced DNA. I would say Douglass himself did not do any kind of full tracing of his history. He understood his relationship to a few of his family members back until maybe his grandparents. And I would also say that there is a group of family members. There's a line of family members. They have an organization called the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, and they've been looking into the tracing their background as well. So I would recommend, checking that out to find out where they understand their origins to be from.
I would like to ask, here I am.
Oh, hi.
I would like to ask, are there any plans to keep this place open 7 days a week or 5 days a week? I don't know, you guys are open only 3 days. And also, in Frederick Douglass' life, he was a part of the temperance movement, which meant that he was strongly against alcohol and drugs. When I visit here quite often, some of the friends here know, but I see that part of the teaching missing when I come inside.
Well, yeah, Douglass was a complicated man. In fact, when this speech was given in the 1850s, the temperance movement was strong, and it was also part of what led the women's rights movement, right? There's similar actors in all these spaces: the temperance movement, the anti-slavery movement, and also the women's rights movement. I would say what's interesting, there's a bottle of wine in this house. So when you guys get a chance to walk through the house, Douglass did host folks from all kinds of backgrounds and interests, right? So on the one hand, while he chose not to personally indulge in alcohol, there was also a welcoming space in this home for people who had different beliefs, right? Which was a very interesting sort of lifestyle to live as a statesman, right?
5 or 7 days.
Oh, 7 days. Unfortunately, I will say that I personally can't make that decision, but I know that there are plans to make sure that more people can continue to visit the home. Any other folks?
Hi.
Oh, yes, hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
During Mr. Douglass's life and his active role with anti-slavery, was he successful in acting and successfully getting any laws passed?
I would say there's a huge history of Frederick Douglass pushing for legislation to be passed. Now, he was not a congressman himself, right? He actually was very good friends with the first African-American senator from Mississippi, Mr. Blanche K. Bruce, who also lived here in DC. And you know, he used his relationships and his placement or presence on certain committees. You'll see some photos inside the House to help move legislation forward. So while he was not a legislator himself, I will say that you can give Frederick Douglass credit for much of the collective push towards abolishing slavery, the Reconstruction Acts that come afterwards, after the up until the 1870s, and really up until his death in 1895, Douglass was pushing for women's rights to vote and things like that. So, yeah, it's hard to just, you know, identify his name on a piece of a bill that was passed like we can with our Congress people, but behind the scenes, definitely pushing a lot of legislation to be passed.
My question is not superficial, but I was wondering if Frederick Douglass was alive, what his opinion would be of all these houses that are still around for plantations where people go and visit, but there's not necessarily much information about slavery, but it's from the perspective of these people who had money and wealth and were enslaving people. What would his opinion be about having these places still in existence where people can come and get married and all those sorts of things?
So I can't speculate on how Frederick Douglass would think about those things today, but I can talk to you a little bit about what his experiences were in the past. So Frederick Douglass visited the home of Jefferson, and not Monticello. He visited Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon. So George Washington. So it's important for us to understand that this was a completely different moment, right? In the early 19th century, people are really just starting to think about preservation of historical homes, monuments, things like that, right? They're really starting to think about how we're going to establish our national narrative. So Frederick Douglass does really interesting things. He starts, he helps to curate an exhibition at the 1893 World's Fair, and he visits all these historic places like Ireland, right? Where he's trying to understand how people actively work to preserve the historical narrative. And he's trying to make his own mark on that. Now, this man wrote 3 autobiographies, right? Who needs to write their story 3 times? Only Frederick Douglass, right? So this was a man who well understood the power of media to influence our understanding of the past. And what he said is that, and let me paraphrase, but basically we need to make use of the past for the purpose of informing our present and future, right? So while I don't have an exact quote about how he felt about visiting Mount Vernon or you know, whether or not they were interpreting the slavery there or talking about the enslaved people at Mount Vernon, I do know that Frederick Douglass understood the power of visiting historic places and reflecting on the history so that we can make better choices for ourselves in our present and our future generations.
Thank you. As someone who's not from the United States, the speech really resonates, I think, with a lot of the experience of a lot of people outside, you know, in other countries where the promise of independence, of freedom sometimes doesn't deliver freedom from oppression for people. I wondered whether we know what influence the speech and Frederick Douglass has had outside of the U.S. In other countries where people are struggling against, whether it be slavery or other forms of oppression.
Yeah, well, Frederick Douglass inspired many generations of activists scholars, folks interested in human rights advocacy across the world. So when you go to, there's places like the UK where his story is very much highlighted as part of the anti-slavery movement, which kind of kicked off within the UK and England. And I would say there's a legacy, internationally. I'm trying to think exactly to answer your question if there's an example of this, the speech itself having as much of a power as opposed to sort of Douglass's legacy as this kind of civil rights activist in general. I'm not familiar exactly with the speech itself having that level of power, but of course, you know, the stories are there, and I actually would love to hear more if anyone is familiar with any sort of monuments or places that highlight the story of Frederick Douglass internationally.
Yes, good afternoon. My question is, I know that Douglass spent time in Haiti as the ambassador there. Was this speech given after his time in Haiti or prior to his time in Haiti? And as I understand, that tenure influenced him in such a way that he came back and he amended his autobiography because of what had happened during the time, the travel to Haiti, trying to travel there with his then wife, and some of the challenges that he encountered traveling to Haiti and then during his time in Haiti. And that's my question. Thank you.
Yes, I love these kind of internationalist perspectives. Yes, Frederick Douglass was sort of ambassador to Haiti when he lived here, a little bit before and during the time he was here. So 1870s. The speech that you heard today, the 4th of July speech to shorten it, was given in 1852. So this was about 20 years before he would become ambassador to Haiti. I will say that Frederick Douglass's introspection and his ability to kind of look back on his own understandings really informed a sort of growing internationalist sort of mindset for Frederick Douglass after he becomes ambassador to Haiti. Of course, Haiti had always sort of functioned in the African American imagination as this space that represented freedom for Black peoples, the strength of Black peoples to claim their own, freedom, rights, ability to govern themselves. He gets there and he understands it being different than that. And so he does come home and reflect on those things. I actually welcome you to take a look at the house when you come inside the house to see if you can see reflections of Haiti in the space. This is something that very much informed his later years, especially as a statesman. And this is going to be our last question. Yeah.
Yes, good morning. First of all, the Haitians defeated Napoleon, and it was many years later that.
Turn the mic on.
Mike's.
It was many years later. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, good morning again. Yeah, the Haitians defeated Napoleon, and it was many years later that Douglass was there as the ambassador. When he gave that speech, the 4th of July speech, slavery was still in existence in 1852. My question would be, is there any indication as to why Douglass did not partner with the British, who had ended slavery some years before 1852? Evidently, he saw some promise in the Constitution of the United States and some reason to believe that this was the place to take a stand. Any thoughts on that?
So the question was whether or not Frederick Douglass partnered with the British, and he did. Very actively did tours of the UK, was able to kind of kind of build some of that wealth and that notoriety that he had at the time through those international tours. And then, sorry, the second part of your question, could you repeat it?
I'm sorry, the second part of the question was concerning not only the collaboration, but I really was talking about the Haitians and the fact that after the Haitians defeated Napoleon, the French, that's when the Louisiana Purchase came about. And they actually decided to leave the Western Hemisphere. And as I said, it was some years later that Douglass became the ambassador.
Right.
But the point I also was making was that speech, when he gave that speech, slavery was still in existence.
Mm-hmm.
It was some 10 years, almost 10 years before the Civil War. So he certainly didn't have any congressional collaborators.
Yes,
The other point I would make is that with respect to international, colonialism is the twin of slavery.
Yes.
And so when the African countries started to gain independence, they also looked at persons like Douglass
Yes.
in their movements.
Yeah, so the gentleman is kind of giving us some historical context to Frederick Douglass's impact and legacy. So the reminder is that, Haiti secures his independence 1804, right? So Frederick Douglass not born until 1818. He's born in Talbot County, Maryland, over on the Eastern Shore. I love to tell a story of him looking out on the Chesapeake Bay and imagining his freedom, which he then self-emancipated. And that's 1838, right? So slavery is very much still entrenched within our nation, right? And then if you move forward a little bit in time, 1852, he's given this speech at the height of the anti-slavery movement. The Civil War is on the brink of happening. Just a few, less than a decade later, a decade or so later, the Civil War starts. Ends in 1864-5. It depends on what you call the end of the Civil War. And it's not until the 13th Amendment is passed that slavery is abolished, except for people who are in the cases of people who are incarcerated. So just a reminder of this kind of timeline of Frederick Douglass's life. He's living from 1818, where the possibility of slavery ending seems so far off, to living through the abolishment of slavery. And then in the 1870s, up until 1895 at his death, he's living in this home in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, and is fighting to push the historical narrative and our collective understanding of what it means to be American to extend to those who were formerly enslaved, and other groups, including there's like a lot going on with immigration at the time. There's a lot going on with women fighting to gain the right to vote. So understand, he's in the midst of all of these big discussions. It's the early American sort of approaches towards, what would we call it? Neocolonialism, or they're sort of, they start to go after Haiti and Puerto Rico, and all of these things are happening in Frederick Douglass's lifetime, right? So there's a lot of things that he's considering, and he's trying to weave a lot of these narratives into one about what does freedom mean, right? John asked you all, when you have the opportunity, think about, how do you fight for freedom, right? How do you define freedom, and how can you help to expand that definition of freedom to better support members of our community, other residents of the United States, visitors who have the right to be here and enjoy these spaces as well? So with that, I want to thank you so much for giving me time to talk. One more question. Oh, we have one more. We got time for one more. Anyone over here? Yes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you.
It can't take long.
Thank you. There is a statue in Lincoln Park of Abraham Lincoln that I believe Douglass, he gave the remarks on his opening day, the unveiling, and it shows Abe Lincoln standing and the slave on his knee. How did Douglass feel about that perspective of the statue? I understand that it was, the funds were raised by ex-slaves. So how did he feel about that perspective of Abe standing and the slave on his knee after the unveiling? Because it was a huge point of conflict in 2020 in the post-George Floyd riots. So how would he have felt about that image at that time in the 1880s?
Yeah, that's a very timely question. So Frederick Douglass was the keynote speaker at that unveiling and dedication in 1876 of the Freedmen's Memorial or Emancipation Group statue. Simply put and truthfully stated, Douglass did not like it. He spoke about it in several newspapers, and he stated that he felt that there should be some type of representation of an African American not on his knees, crouching, but standing tall like a man. And many years later, that was fulfilled with the erection of the Mary McLeod Bethune Memorial on the other end of the park. Did I answer your question? Awesome. Let's give Ranger Brittany another hand. Thank you. So on that note, next Saturday, we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Mary McLeod Bethune Memorial in Lincoln Park. So the other statue that was placed at the other end of the park, across from the statue of Lincoln with the African American man, put there in 1974 on the 99th anniversary of Mary McLeod Bethune's birthday. We're celebrating its 50th anniversary with a rededication ceremony. There'll be music, a Bethune reenactor, and other various activities. So please come out and join us. We have postcards here on the table about that. And then the week following at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, we have our annual Lily and Lotus Fest. So there are postcards on the table about that as well. The Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site is open on Thursdays and Fridays. The other site that we manage here at National Capital Parks East. And finally, the Carnegie Woodson Home National Historic Site, which we are still working on and should be reopened to the public next year. These are the 3 historic homes that celebrate the contributions of African Americans located here in DC that are a part of the National Park system. Before we go any further, next up, for those who have been dying to get inside of the house, we are offering first floor walkthroughs. We're going to start lining up at the back of the house. So please meet Ranger Julie at the back of the house. We're allowing 15 people in at a time. We have to preserve the integrity of the home as well as the historic objects. Once everyone gets through the house, we'll be back to offering tours on the hour. But right now, first floor walkthroughs. Thank you all for coming.
Let's go over and find them.
I'll get it from you inside.
I'm getting ready. Okay, my number is 202.
Okay.
355.
212.
No, 202. Okay.
Oh, wow, Charles.
Well, go give me one.
That's me. I'm Kenny.
Kenny, I'm Kenny.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, I'll text you
one and just text me, and then I'll text you the information.
All right, thanks, Kenny. Thank you, brother. God bless you.
Thank you. Be safe.